Hey y'all, it's Mrs. Haney back with another lesson, this time on writing slope-intercept equation form from tables. And y'all honestly know how to do this already, so today shouldn't be too terribly difficult. Alright, so let's take a look at the steps here. So step one, it says to determine the slope, which is the constant rate of change. We've talked about that before. And you need to first find the change in y values, then you need to find the change in x values, and you need to write it as the slope m, which is change in y over change in x, or as we write it with the little triangles, which means delta y over delta x. Then you need to determine the y-intercept. So those are the two things you have to do. Find the rate of change and the y-intercept. So remember, the y-intercept in a table is where x equals 0. And the paired y value is that y-intercept. If there is no x equals 0, then you have to extend your table, either up or down, and find the table until, extend the table until you find x equals 0. Then we're going to write our equation in slope-intercept form as y equals mx plus b. So let's take a look at this table. So if you notice, they looked at their change in y values first, and they noticed that all the numbers were being increased by 2. And so therefore, off to the right here, they did their change in y was 2. And then they went back and looked at their change in x values, and they noticed that it was increasing by 1. So change in x is 1. And then, as we all know, if you can divide, you're going to divide. So 2 divided by 1 is 2. Then they went and found their y-intercept. Remember, x has to equal 0. So we circle it, we highlight it, we do whatever. And if you notice, it says b equals 4. Now the equation, as we all know, is y equals mx plus b, where m represents your slope, your constant rate of change, your change in y over change in x, all the things. And then b represents your y-intercept. That's where the line crosses the y-axis at. And then you just plug those two numbers in where they belong. And that's it. Now we're going to practice. So it says to write an equation in slope-intercept form from the table y equals mx plus b. And then it's going to ask us those same questions. So let's first take a look at number 1. And I'm going to look at my y values first. So I'm just going to do my little, I don't even know what to call these. But yeah, I'm going to look for that pattern. So from -3 to -1, I notice that I'm getting closer to 0. So I notice that I am adding 2. And then from -1 to 1, I also added 2. And then from 1 to 3, I added 2. And again, this is my change in y values. Now I'm going to look at the x values, so change in x. All right, so I have -5 to 0, and that tells me that I added 5. And then from 0 to 5, I added 5. And then from 5 to 10, I added 5. Sorry guys, I'm not feeling too well. All right, so I'm going to write just off to the side here, change in y over change in x. So the y values changed by 2, and then those x values changed by 5. So it is a fraction. We're going to keep it as a fraction. So this is our slope. So m equals 2/5. Now, is this number positive or negative? Well, 2/5 is positive, so therefore our slope is positive. Okay, now we have to find our y-intercept. That's what this next section is, because it says when x equals 0, y equals what? So let's go back to the table and see if we have in a spot where x equals 0. And if you go to the second row, you see that it's 0 and -1. So I'm going to highlight that 0, -1. And so that is my y-intercept. So when x equals 0, y equals 1. So the y-intercept, or not 1, sorry, -1. I'm going to double check. Yeah, -1. So then it says to determine the y-intercept. So my y-intercept, b equals -1. And now that equation is y, and I'm writing it underneath because I want to write the formula first. Y equals mx plus b. So going back to the information that we wrote, we're going to put y equals, instead of m, remember m is our slope, our constant rate of change, our change in y over change in x. That number is 2/5. So I'm going to put y equals 2 over 5 x. And then I'm going to put plus, and then in parentheses, b is -1. So I'm going to put plus -1. And that's it. That's all you have to do. So let's go ahead and do this next one. So this one's a horizontal table. So remember, the fraction is going to be opposite of how we find it. So what I mean is, it's going to be, your change in y over change in x. But if you look at this table, the x values are on top. So make sure to pay attention to that. Okay, so let's start with our change in y values. So going from 6 to 4, I noticed that I had to subtract 2. 4 to 2, I'm also subtracting 2. 2 to 0, subtracting 2. And then 0 to -2, also subtracting 2. So it's safe to say that the change in y is -2 over, and now we got to figure out the other one. So looking at those x values from 0 to 1, I had to add 1. Remember, we're looking for that pattern. Adding 1. 2 to 3, we added 1. And then 3 to 4, we added 1. So it's -2 over +1. Now, if we can simplify it, we will. So I'm going to think to myself, 2 divided by 1 is 2, and then a negative divided by a positive is a negative. So our slope, or m, or our rate of change, is -2. And now it's asking, is this positive or negative? Well, the number is negative, so therefore our slope is negative, just like that. Sorry. So then it says when x equals 0, y equals blank. So now we got to go back to the table and look for that y-intercept. So I see it right here. When x equals 0, y equals 6. So I'm going to circle it and highlight it. All right, so y equals 6. It says to determine the y-intercept. Well, it's just going to be that number 6. Because remember, that coordinate is 0, 6. And that's where the line crosses the y-axis at. So now we write our equation. I'm going to put the formula down below. So I have y equals mx plus b. And I'm going to plug in our numbers. So it's y equals, instead of m is up above there. So we're going to put -2 x plus, and our y-intercept, or b, is 6. And that's it. All right, if you've made it this far, go ahead and grab the paper from the sub, and I will do a couple with you on your work. All right, let's take a look at the directions. So this is your practice. It says to determine the slope of each table of values and state whether it is positive or negative, the y-intercept, and write the equation. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So number 1, we have to figure out our change in y first, and then we have to figure out our change in x. So let's take a look at the y values. So from -8 to -5, I notice that I'm getting closer to 0, so that tells me that I added 3. -5 to -2, added 3. And then from -2 to 1, I added 3. And now for those y values, from -10 to -5, oops, not y values. Miss Haney's losing her marbles. Those are x values. So those x values, I noticed that from -10 to -5, again, I'm getting closer to 0. So that tells me I added 5. And then from -5 to 0, again, I added 5. And then from 0 to 5, I added 5. So remember, slope is your change in y over change in x. So we have to write it that way every single time. So our y values, the pattern was we changed by 3. And then the x values we changed by 5. So our slope is 3/5. Now that number, is it positive or negative? Well, it's positive. And then our y-intercept, remember it has to be 0, y. So let's look for where x equals 0. And if we go down in the table, it's in the third row right here at 0, -2. And I'm also going to highlight it. So if you have a highlighter, feel free to highlight. And so that number is -2. And then our equation, again, I'm going to write that formula down below. Y equals mx plus b. So instead of m, we're going to put y equals that fraction of 3/5, so 3 over 5 x plus in parentheses -2. And that is our equation. So I'm going to put a box around that. All right, let's take a look at number 2. This one's just a little bit different, and so this is why I wanted to go over the work with you guys, is because I don't want you to sit there and, not know what to do. Okay, so same thing. We're going to start with our change in y values. So from 0 to -2, I'm getting further away from 0. So that tells me I'm subtracting 2, and then subtracting 2. And then now I'm going to look at my change in x values. So it looks like I'm getting away from 0 because the number itself is getting bigger and it's negative. So I noticed that I subtracted 5, minus 5, minus 5. Okay, so let's write this one out. So we have our change in y over change in x. So our y values change by -2, and then our x values change by -5. Well, when you have two negatives, and remember, the fraction bar technically means to divide. So when you have two negative numbers, like your numerator is negative and your denominator is negative, this actually ends up having a positive slope. So it ends up just being +2 over +5. So your slope in this case is positive. Now, the y-intercept. If you look, again, remember it has to be 0, y. Looking at this table, I don't see that. So I'm going to have to extend my table. In this case, I'm going to have to extend it to the top, because that pattern, you'll see why in a second. So from -5 to 0, I have to add 5. Well, I was subtracting 5 when I was going down, and so I have to add 5 when I'm going up. So I have to do the same thing over here with my y values. So I was subtracting 2 when I was going down, but now I have to add 2 going up. So this is +2. There we go. So 0 plus 2 gives me 2. And so therefore, my y-intercept is going to be 0, 2. And I'm going to highlight that because that's just good practice. So now, let's see. So I put 0, y. Well, we figured out the y-intercept is just 2. Now I'm going to write that equation. So I have y. Oops. I don't know why it's not working, y'all. Let's try this again. Y equals mx plus b. So we're going to put our numbers in where they belong. So we have y equals, instead of m, we're going to put our slope or rate of change 2 over 5. So it's 2/5 x plus, instead of b, our y-intercept is 2. And now I'm going to put a box around that. All right, great job writing slope-intercept form from tables.